Good evening, everyone. We're glad you're here. Welcome to Benco Dental's One Step Ahead, New Design Concepts for Infection Prevention. My name is Chuck Cohen. I'm one of the two managing directors of Benco Dental. This evening's program will include 1 hour of continuing education credit. So as participants start to enter our room, I will read the requirements for the CE to make sure everyone's aligned. When you register for the class, please use your legal name, the one that is on your license, so that we can match up your name with the CE credit that we're going to send. Each person who wants CE must register separately with their own name and email address. You must be logged into the webinar on your own device. Each registrant must watch the complete program to be awarded the CE. After the course, you'll receive a survey with your CE certificate. Please return the completed survey. It may take up to 30 days to receive your CE credit. If you're watching on your phone, please know that we'll only get your phone number and not your name. So please do email your name, title of the course, and the telephone number you watched with to practicecoaching@benco.com. That's practicecoaching@benco.com. At the conclusion, we'll have some time for Q&A with Melissa Sproul. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there is a Q&A section. Don't use the chat section if you see that, but use the Q&A. Enter your questions there, and I will make sure that Melissa gets to them before the end of our seminar and our session this evening. So, very pleased to introduce Melissa Sproul, the manager of Benco's design department. Melissa comes from a long healthcare background. She has several degrees. I don't remember which ones they are, but there are many and varied. And before coming to Benco, she worked at Geisinger, which is one of the largest health systems in Pennsylvania, doing design of healthcare on the medical side. So she joined Benco about 2 years ago. And one of the things that's been 3 years ago, one of the things that's been very exciting in the last few months is Melissa has had the opportunity to bring out her whole knowledge of healthcare design from her medical days and been able to apply that to the dental setting. So that's where we are. She's already presented her first seminar several months ago on design concepts in a COVID-19 world. This evening, she's going to present the second in what we hope will be a long series. Tonight's program, One Step Ahead, New Design Concepts for Infection Prevention. With that, happy to turn things over to Melissa Sproul.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm so happy to be here. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, and I think you guys will take notice throughout the presentation. It truly is an area of passion and enjoyment, and the one thing that I'll share with all of you about my background, in addition to designing hospitals before I came to Benco, my husband is actually a general dentist, and the first day that he was home from work because dentistry was closed, it's like we sat across the kitchen table looking at each other saying, now what? So I share that with all of you because I approach these design recommendations with an extra special level of empathy because we are very much a dental family, and I recognize how difficult the last several months have been with all of the unknowns. So hopefully what we share today can give you some positive insight into the future. The goal is to give some tips and tricks for those with existing practices, but then also look forward and really think about what does the dental practice of the future look like. So just to give an overview of what's in store for the next hour, I'd like to start this evening by talking about how and why does design make infection control easier. There are a lot of folks who think of designing their dental practice as, oh, this is the fun part, right? We're picking finishes, we're picking colors and textures and making the practice feel like your own. But it's really much more than that, and I'm going to explain the why behind design can be such a powerful tool to up-level the infection control, efficiency, and overall success of your practice. The other thing we're going to talk about is how have the needs of the dental practice changed in response to COVID-19? Design at its best should be a response to the needs of the people who use the space. So in this case, it's you, it's your staff, and it's your patients. When those needs change, your design has to adapt accordingly. So we're going to talk through that as well. And finally, all of this information will culminate as I share with you what we feel the dental practice of the future looks like. So, beginning with the notion that good design makes infection control easier, how exactly does that work? So, I'm going to share with you what I think are the 3 top reasons why. The first is that design actually influences human behavior. Design has so much to do with how we interact with the world around us, and I'm going to give a couple examples that will show exactly what that means. The second way that design is a vehicle to make infection control easier is because when we address the design of our practice, we have the opportunity to implement what we call engineering controls. Engineering controls are a category of solutions determined by OSHA and referenced by the CDC that are ways to make environments safer by separating people from hazards. So we'll go through different ways to do that through design as well. And finally, there is some technology and innovation that's changing so rapidly, especially in the world we're living in today with this, increased emphasis on infection control. So I'm going to share with you the latest technology and innovation that we have found at Benco that will help promote good infection control practices at your office. So how exactly does design influence human behavior? If you're paying close attention to the slides, I may have influenced your behavior just now. You'll see on the bottom right, there's some text on the screen that's really small. And what you probably did, if you're paying attention, is squint your eyes or bring your face really close to the screen or some combination of the two. So that's a very simple way that design has a direct effect on how we behave. And I start with this information because as we go through all of our recommendations and the things that we're studying here at Benco, I want you to feel confident that implementing these things will change your behavior in positive ways, change the behavior of your staff to make them more efficient, to feel safer, and to be more in compliance with things that we know keep the office safe. And it will also change the behavior of your patients, mostly so that they feel safe and comfortable. So how are a few other ways that design influences human behavior? Let's say at your lunch break, someone at your practice, they have a bottle of water. It looks just like this, and they go into the break room to dispose of it, and this is what they have in front of them. What are they going to do? They're going to put the plastic water bottle in the trash. But if the space is designed a little bit different with something as simple as a second choice, the participant is more likely to do the right thing, right? Now they have the option to recycle, and it's going to change their behavior. Here's another example I like to share, and it's kind of a silly one, but I think that it's really powerful. So as a designer, even before the hospital days, I designed many corporate offices, and it was really during the open office movement. And there were so many clients who would come to me and say, we really want to redesign our team area, our break room, if you will. And working with the open concept of our plan, we want this to feel really cool, like a coffee bar, like a place where people want to hang out and congregate and feel good. But I'm hesitant to do that because in my existing office, the sink in the break room always ends up looking like this. And it makes me crazy because it's so unsightly. So my design response to that is going to be, let's change the behavior of those using the space and give them a skinny sink. There are now no opportunities for dirty dishes to pile up and soak within that sink, thus changing the behavior of those using the space. So I know they're a little bit silly, but I share those examples with you just to get across the power and the impact that the design of your practice has on the folks who use it. The second reason why design is really a vehicle for addressing infection control is the implementation of engineering controls. So what are engineering controls? So this triangle that you see, this upside down triangle on the left-hand side, this comes from OSHA. And OSHA, they sort of stack and rank the methods by which they can make workplaces safer. And you'll see right in the middle in yellow are engineering controls. Engineering controls are physical changes to the workplace that either eliminate or reduce a hazard. Engineering controls can also include process changes that minimize contact with the hazard. So the hazard in this case being an infectious disease. Now, COVID-19 is not going to last forever, we hope, but it certainly won't be the last airborne infectious disease to affect the field of dentistry. So we want to approach practice design moving forward and really use this opportunity to kind of straighten our posture or sharpen our pencils, right? And make our office safer as a best practice. So this is all about changing processes. We just reviewed how space can change behavior. Those processes that you're trying to integrate to make your practice safer by minimizing contact with a hazard is all something that can be done by changing the behavior of those who use your space. And finally, engineering controls also consist of isolating or enclosing any hazardous processes. So as we go through this presentation and when we get to the part where we share what we think the dental office of the future looks like, you'll notice these engineering controls sort of baked in, right? We're physically changing the environment by adding things like barriers. We're changing processes by rearranging rooms and thinking about how we use space differently to change processes so those processes are safer. And finally, by thinking about space differently and containing things that may not have been contained before, or separating spaces that may have been combined in the past, we're isolating or enclosing opportunities for hazard. So the third way that design is a way to address infection control in your practice is through technology and innovation. So touchless technology has been around for quite some time, but I would say that it is really accelerating with so much of the world looking to do things hands-free. I can't think of a time since before March of this year that I haven't used my debit card at a store and punched my PIN in using my knuckle instead of my fingertip, right? So we are all a little bit more cautious about how we're behaving and the things that we're touching. So touchless technology is a pretty simple way to add some niceties to your practice that will make it cleaner, but also make people feel a little bit safer. So touchless faucets is really a simple one, but there are even things like touchless doors. You might want to take that door into your sterilization space and add a touchless sensor so that your staff can go in with full cassettes that need to be sterilized without having to use their hands. Touchless payment methods, and touchless plumbing controls. On the other hand, we have antimicrobial technology. And I bring this up because there's technology available that a lot of folks don't realize, right? The breadth of things that have applied surfaces and surface coatings that resist bacteria or actually kill it on contact. So this includes furniture, as long as it's commercial grade, ideally healthcare grade. It includes not only the surfaces on that furniture, such as the armrests, right? Armrests are touched by so many folks who are in and out of your practice all day long. It's also the upholstery on your furniture. So it can be specified with coatings, either with silver ion technology. Silver ion is inherently antimicrobial, or with different coatings. There's such a thing as antimicrobial paint. If you have been following along in this series, this is something I spoke about a couple of months ago. The antimicrobial paint is good for 4 years after it's applied, and it kills bacteria for, there's a cycle of time. So I think it's a 4-hour span. You could touch it and you know that that bacteria is going to go away. There's also antimicrobial coatings on light switches and plumbing fixtures as well. So now that we've talked about how design can affect infection control, let's take it a step further. So good design is a response to needs. And in the state of dental practice design, those needs have to be responsive to what you need as a provider, what your staff needs to feel comfortable, feel safe, and be efficient at their jobs, and what your patients need to feel safe and comfortable. So what are these new needs or emphasized needs that have resulted from the pandemic? Again, if you're following the series, we've kind of been talking about these, but I think it's great to revisit them because our design recommendations are really rooted in response to these needs. So number one is safety and infection control. Now, dental offices have always held themselves to high standards when it comes to safety and infection control. But the COVID-19 pandemic has really emphasized that need. And even though the CDC and the ADA have made some recommendations that are evolving, and by the way, we're giving you our very best thinking as part of this presentation that is in alignment with their latest recommendations, but we always encourage you to consult the sources directly to make sure you're getting the latest information. So beyond the normal level of safety and infection control inherent in a dental practice, what we're looking at just as a best practice is providing clear and distinct separation between dirty and clean in the dental practice, especially as it relates to space. We're also addressing air quality. Chuck mentioned during the introduction that I designed hospitals before coming over to the Benco team, and there are some practices that have been in place in the hospital worlds for decades that do exactly this: separate dirty and clean through their design. So when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, it was a very intuitive move to say, gosh, we should take the learnings that have been working in hospitals for decades and apply them to the dental office to really up-level success. So the second set of needs, beyond safety and infection control, are all about efficiency. So this means, how can we move and circulate through the dental practice in a way that reduces cross-contamination? Again, this is something that we are borrowing from hospital design. And by the way, hospital design, there's a related field that's called evidence-based design. And what that means is, in the design of hospitals, there are really awesome studies that link the physical space, the environment, to things through the responses that patients will give on patient satisfaction surveys. So what's great is, with this body of research, it really shows that the techniques that drive the way hospitals are designed are rooted in research and rooted in things that we know are going to be effective. The third one is, we have new and emphasized needs around comfort and well-being. So the first two needs I would call more functional needs, needs related to how we use spaces, new spaces that may be required. The third, comfort and well-being, is more of a psychological need. So what do we do to make patients feel safe as they return? And what do we do to make ourselves and our staff feel comfortable as well? We think that this means physical distancing and providing areas of respite. Of course, physical distancing is something that is recommended by the CDC, but there are things that you can do in the design of your practice that cue a behavior that make physical distancing a bit easier and more intuitive. And in terms of areas of respite, we're returning to dentistry in a different world, and it may be causing some anxieties, some stress, and just change, right? Change in general can be difficult to digest as we return to work, as your practices ramp back up after the closing. So how can we provide thoughtful areas for our staff to not only make them feel valued, but give them that space where they can take a breather and have an area of respite for their own psychological well-being? So we're going to take each one of those needs and break them down with a little bit more information, a little bit more color. And then again, this will all culminate into sharing the plan that we feel is a good indication of the future of practice design. So going back to the first need around safety and infection control, where we talk about a distinct separation between dirty and clean. So if you look at this here, the circle in the center is all around how do we separate these spaces. On the left-hand side, you'll see sterilization, lab, and soiled holding. Sterilization, I'm sure all of you have in your practices. Labs tend to vary, and soiled holding is a new concept that I will talk everyone through. But these spaces on the left-hand side in the orange circles are considered dirty spaces. Dirty spaces means we're dealing with contaminated items that can potentially contaminate surfaces. We're treating and processing items and handling things in a way that can release contaminants into the air. We want to deal with the air in these spaces in a specialized way. We'll talk about air quality in just a moment. But on the hospital side, in any spaces that are considered dirty, the air is contained and either filtered and recirculated safely or captured and exhausted out of the building. So it shows that hospitals are really investing in engineering controls and the infrastructure of their building to reinforce the air quality in these dirty spaces to really enforce their infection control practices. You really want to start with the design of the space and start with separating these areas and then layer in your air quality solutions on top to be the most effective. On the right-hand side of the circle, in light blue, you'll see clean supply storage and PPE donning. Every practice has some sort of clean supply storage, but it's not always designated. It's very often combined with sterilization. Sometimes this is just out of default or necessity because there's an empty cabinet or drawer. Sometimes it's because there's a popular style that's sort of galley style where you have sterilization on one side and clean supply on the other. We have to separate these two spaces and we have to do so in a distinct way. If sterilization is a dirty space and the air is potentially contaminated, if the surfaces are potentially contaminated, we don't want our clean supplies to be sharing that space. So let's not only designate space, but let's be a little bit more mindful about it as well. We're all dealing with increased levels of PPE. So beyond just storage challenges about the day-to-day supplies, what do we do with all of this PPE so it doesn't end up stacked in boxes on the floor of your sterilization center? How can we approach that a little bit better? And related to that, where do we don our PPE? So in the medical side, donning refers to gowning up, if you will. And this is considered a clean space that has a constant supply of clean, uncontaminated air that has not been contaminated because it's being recirculated from anywhere else in the building. It's a space so for example, if you are a surgeon and you're going into surgery, you're going to scrub up. And then you're going to go into the donning room and you're going to put on all of your PPE. It's going to be right there in front of you, easy to access. I'm hearing feedback from many practices, and we work with a lot of them. About 1,000 dental practices each year utilize our design department. And so many have come to us and said that they are shocked by how jarring it is to have disposable gowns or reusable lab coats to put on all these extra steps, and there's nowhere in their practice to do it. So it's really important to be mindful and give that some forethought. So you'll see how all of these concepts are demonstrated in the plan in just a few moments. Now let's talk about air quality. So air quality, as I mentioned, start with the design of your space. Let the way your space is laid out enforce your infection control protocols and add in air quality techniques as another layer of protection. Again, if you've been following the series, we've done a deeper dive on some of these, such as negative pressure isolation when it first came out in the interim guidelines from the CDC. And we have really been pleased with the amount of solutions that are coming to the market and the clarity with which we're able to explain what this means, because it can be a little bit confusing. So at a high level, you can deal with air quality using 3 different techniques. The first is what's called isolation capture. This is that negative pressure isolation that at the very beginning, I know here in Pennsylvania, our Department of Health came up with a requirement that said dental practices, if they wanted to be open and treat emergencies, they needed these negative pressure isolation rooms. Now, it ended up being redacted. The guidelines were updated because it really wasn't feasible for dental practices, but it left a lot of practitioners like yourselves wondering, what does this mean? Is it something I should do? Is it something I should be looking at? Now, I would say that there's sort of a spectrum of safety. And where you fall on that spectrum of safety really has to do with what your priorities are, maybe your geographic location, the demographics of your practice, where you're located, your goals. So none of these things have to be applied, to the letter. There's a rule book that tells you exactly what to do, right? So here at Benco, we like to talk about choice and talk about solutions to empower you to make the decision that works best with you. Negative pressure isolation, it's no longer in the requirements for dental practices. It was a recommendation for good reason, because these rooms are the rooms that hospitals use to treat patients who they know have airborne infectious diseases. Basically, what this means is it's a hermetically sealed room. So it is a room that has 4 walls and a door, and it's very tightly sealed. There's seals around, the gaps around windows and light fixtures. The room is sealed in this way so that any airborne contaminants in that room can be contained and safely exhausted out of the building, or safely cleaned through HEPA filtration before it's recirculated. It's sort of the most stringent and the most extreme measure of applying air quality techniques. This, by the way, addresses the ambient air in the space. The second category of air quality is called source capture. So the ambient air is the air all around us, but where are we having the biggest problem that's making us think, what do we do with our practice design? It's at the oral cavity. So source capture has everything to do with using something like an extraction arm directly at the source, directly at the oral cavity, to capture those contaminants before they have the opportunity to get released into the ambient air. And the last technique is called ambient capture. So the picture that I have here is one of many solutions. This is a light fixture in a ceiling grid that has air filtration in the vents and the sides. So it's a nice non-invasive way to take that ambient air, put it through very high-grade HEPA filtration, and safely recirculate it into the room. So again, whichever method is right for you, maybe it's a combination of a few. I know if it were me, I would make sure that I was treating the ambient air as well as the air at the source of the oral cavity, but layer these in with your design for the best results. So let's talk about efficiency and the new and emphasized need for efficiency in your practice. So this is all about how can we move and circulate through the space in ways that avoid unnecessary interactions and reduce the instances of potential cross-contamination. So some techniques to do this, even in your existing practice, is number one, you want to avoid bottlenecks. Look at the practice. It's funny, we get involved in our day and we get sucked into the everyday and the movement and the chaos and, socializing with patients and staff and getting work done, that sometimes it's very useful just to pause and observe and think, where are the pain points? And if you take that moment to see what's happening as people move through your practice, I promise you the pain points will present themselves. What we find is these usually happen, patient screening, which is a new need. So if you are doing patient screening in your practice, according to recommendations, make sure it's done in a way that it doesn't create a bottleneck. One good way to do that is, not only the flow at which patients come in and when patients wait in their car, but when you're in that area, make sure that the practitioner doing the screening has the tools that they need within reach so that they can do it all efficiently and quickly and not create a bottleneck. Another area where bottlenecks tend to occur is at checkout. This especially happens when a checkout turns into a sensitive conversation about treatment plans, finances, payment options, scheduling. So what we like to do from a design standpoint is have a room close by to your checkout flow where you can pull those sensitive conversations aside and have those in a room, which, by the way, will make your patients feel much more comfortable and open in their communication with you. Situate this near your checkout area. If you're in an existing practice that doesn't have this today, this is often, by the way, a business office, an office manager space, a consultation room is ideal. Even if you don't have that in your current practice, look at the spaces around, really scrutinize them and decide if there's an area that can be repurposed or used in a better way to avoid these bottlenecks at checkout. And also sterilization. I've described sterilization as kind of like the kitchen island of the dental practice, right? It's like my house. It's Grand Central Station. Everyone's in and around that kitchen island all the time. It's probably the highest traffic in my home, and I'm sure it's the same for many of your practices. So one great way to avoid bottlenecks in your sterilization, first, inherently through the design, kind of an in and out concept is really useful. So you've got a door on one side, a door on the other, and staff can flow through. But also when you're in sterilization, put some mindfulness around the organization, make it so that there's a place for everything and everything in its place, and a good system for maintaining that so that when folks are in sterilization, they can do what they need and get in and out quickly. The other thing from an efficiency standpoint is reducing unnecessary staff and patient travel through the practice. So you could see on the plans on the right-hand side, we took a typical practice that was designed, I think, back in 2018. And we mapped out, you could see that little red line, the flow. And designers, by the way, are always looking at patient flow, staff flow. We kind of put ourselves in the shoes of the people using the space to make sure that our layouts are going to work. And you can see that that circulation becomes a little bit like spaghetti, right? There's different ways to go, there's different choices to make, and there are opportunities to, when you get from point A to point B and you have too many choices and it's not clean, it can make that path longer, or it can lead to unnecessary interactions. If you look at the plan on the right-hand side, on the other hand, you'll notice that that circulation path is much cleaner. So if you're designing a new practice or maybe modifying your existing practice, keep this in mind as you put your design together. And finally, from an efficiency standpoint, have the tools and supplies you need where you need them. So going back to how to make sterilization more efficient, how to avoid bottlenecks at patient screening, it's really important to have these things within reach. By the way, it's going to, I think, help you and your staff have a better day, right? Because when things are organized and you have the tools you need to do your job, it just makes it that much easier. So the third need that has risen from the COVID-19 pandemic is really enhanced focus on comfort and well-being. So this is all about physical distancing and providing areas of respite. So in the reception space, one technique that we love is the use of mobile translucent screens for the perception of safety. The same can be employed at your front desk. I don't think that these have to be anything terribly permanent or expensive. I think the nice thing about screens that are mobile is you're able to change and adapt them as you need to. And the nice thing about translucency is it creates that cue, that behavioral cue that says, I'm over here, you stay over there. I feel like I have this little bit of distance that makes me feel safer. But the translucency does so in a way that's friendlier and more open. The other tip for reception spaces is the use of healthcare grade furnishings that can be cleaned according to EPA registered protocols. So I did a deep dive on this on our first session back in March, but when the CDC recommendations came out, they cited some research that said soft surfaces in healthcare spaces are proven vehicles of infection transmission. Soft surfaces means anything in your reception space that's a soft textile upholstery. Soft surfaces can even include wood, so like the wood arm cap on a chair. If that wood is not treated properly, it's really considered a soft porous surface that can harbor bacteria. So there is no EPA registered protocol for cleaning soft surfaces, and there's a 68% transmission rate. So if you touch something soft that has something nasty on it and you then touch a doorknob, there's a 68% chance that you've transmitted that something nasty from point A to point B. But if you're using healthcare grade furnishings that can be cleaned and decontaminated properly, you're going to reduce this risk. So it's very important to invest in healthcare grade furnishings. And finally, as you're laying out reception spaces, being mindful of physical distancing, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be spaced out like bank tellers, right? There are ways to be a little bit friendlier about this. One way that we have found is group your seating in clusters. So you'll see here on the rendering, sort of the closest cluster of seating to us. All of these seats are 6 feet apart, but they're arranged in a way that just feels a little bit friendlier and a little bit more conducive to community and comfort and hospitality. Another tip that we like to share is mix coordinating styles, both seating styles and upholstery styles. Adding that little bit of interest can make the space feel a lot friendlier, a lot more interesting, and less clinical. So we mentioned areas of respite. So this is a great opportunity to really give some thought to your team space. Team spaces are so often an afterthought, but it's so important during this time for the staff to really feel like they have a place to take a breather, eat lunch, have a cup of coffee, or even do something as simple as hang their hat. So I love the inclusion of lockers or cubbies so that everybody feels like they have a designated space. And I also think if you have furnishings that are old, if you have tables that are delaminating, right, the edges are coming off, exposing the substrate underneath, that often happens in old furniture or even old cabinetry. These are areas that not only look unsightly and could make your staff feel like they're, you don't want them to feel like second-class citizens. You want to give them a space that shows them they're important. But these things can also harbor bacteria and make the team space easier to clean. So it's a great opportunity to give your space some TLC. So now that we've talked about the why, so why is design a method for reducing infection control, and what are these new needs from the pandemic that we're addressing? How does all of this culminate into what we think could be the dental practice of the future? So I share with you today a planning study that we put together at Benco that combines all of these concepts. So you enter the space here at the vestibule, which is on the top left of the plan. I wish I had a pointer here. Let's see. I think you could follow along. So you enter on the top left in the vestibule, you'll see there's a reception space that's appropriately sized, but not oversized. You'll also notice that there's no beverage center here. There's no video games, there's no, kid-friendly stations. That's not to say that the days of those niceties won't return, but for right now, we're saying, instead of dumping all of that space into reception, can we still make it sized appropriately, but borrow some of that space for some of these other functions that are going to help with efficiency and infection control? You'll see the practice has what I would call an H-shaped circulation. So you have operatories on the top, operatories on the bottom, with a core of circulation space in the middle. I'm going to do a deeper dive with you to show you exactly what that circulation or what that support core looks like, because that's really what's going to make the biggest impact here. But with the H-shaped circulation, so you have the ability to go from the top half of the practice down to the bottom and in between, it's really an efficient way of circulating and giving everybody access to the support spaces that they need. You'll see here that there is a team space that has locker cubes over on the right-hand side. These lockers don't take up very much space, but they can make a huge difference in the well-being of your staff. You'll also notice that there's an on-site washer and dryer. So it's so important to think about how we're dealing with scrubs and PPE, whether we're using things that are reusable or disposable or some combination of the two. I will share personally that at my husband's practice, I have not seen him come home in a set of scrubs since before March. They are now doing all of their laundry at the practice. So it's an easy way to help, contain anything that could possibly be contaminated. Even if you're using a third-party laundering system for scrubs or gowns, you still have to think of, what do I do with this accumulation of soiled linens in the meantime? And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment with a designated soiled holding space. The other thing you'll notice is that lab is separate from sterilization. There are some practices where they're combined, and clean supply is separate as well. There's designated space on the very bottom of the plan next to the business office for tele-dentistry. We've all been hearing about the rise of tele-dentistry, so we were able to borrow from what are hospitals using to make tele-dentistry work, and how can we apply that to the dental world. So let's take a deeper dive and look at this area highlighted in green, which is what we'll call the support core of the plan that really applies all of these new space planning methodologies and separation of dirty and clean. So you'll see here clean supply up at the top of the plan, and just below that is instrument processing, or what would normally be called sterilization. These are two separate and distinct rooms. Now, if you have a practice where you have someone staffed in sterilization, just because we have two different rooms here does not imply that you need an extra person to staff. Here's how these spaces work. Instrument processing is designed to be easily accessed from a common staff corridor. You can go in, drop off your dirty cassettes, your cassettes can be processed. That room, by the way, has a wall of windows. So you'll notice on the very bottom, there's some extra lines there. Those indicate window walls. So if you currently have an open sterilization center in your practice, a lot of practitioners like it because they sort of use it as a showpiece, right? And they say to their patients, here's our sterilization process. This is what it looks like. It's kind of a stop. It's kind of a tour guide stop, right? You can still have the opportunity to show your patients your instrument processing procedures by just including some glass. But with this room being separate, you have the ability to treat the air quality in a more effective way. It also means that you can grab your clean supplies, which are located just above instrument processing. You'll notice that there's a little door in between these two rooms, and it's intended to be a pass-through. So you process, you get to the end, you wrap your cassettes, you put that cassette in a pass-through door that is then accessed from the clean supply room in order to be stored and put away. Separation of the clean supply room, again, allows air quality to be addressed in a really effective way. By sealing off this room, you have the ability for whether it's your contractor, your HVAC contractor, your designer, whomever's working on your project, or if it's an existing space, you can call a good HVAC company. They can manipulate the airflow in the building to increase the amount of fresh air that's pumped into your clean supply room. So what this does is it ensures that your clean supplies remain clean and are not contaminated by air traveling through from anywhere else in the building. The other thing that designating clean supplies does to help promote infection control is as your staff needs to pick up supplies, they have the ability to enter clean supply without having to go through a dirty space. If you're storing your supplies in your sterilization center, your staff has to enter what's considered a dirty space to get clean supplies, right? So there's another opportunity for cross-contamination. Keeping these things separate is not only efficient, but it's much safer in that regard. So you'll notice across the corridor from instrument processing, there's a room called soiled holding. So we talked a bit about what do we do with all of the increased PPE, whether it's reusable linen or disposables. There's going to be a much greater and faster accumulation of that in your practice. In the hospital world, they use what's called soiled holding rooms. These are contained spaces where you can safely keep anything that might be contaminated. The air in soiled holding in a hospital is typically handled the same as it would be in a sterilization or a dirty space. That air is contained as much as possible, and it's safely treated and filtered before being recirculated, or ideally it's exhausted directly out of the building. So if you're building a practice from scratch, or if you're renovating a practice, this is an absolute must from our experience and from the feedback that we're hearing from our customers. And even if you have an existing practice, is there an area that you can commandeer? Is there a space that you're maybe not using in the most efficient way and you could borrow from it or repurpose it for some sort of safe soiled holding? So you'll also notice that the lab is separate from clean supply and sterilization. I know there are some practices that mix these functions. It's problematic from an acoustic standpoint. Labs tend to be very loud, but these are also considered dirty spaces. Now, granted, I know depending on your practice, the use of your lab might be a little bit different depending on your strategy and what you're using it for. But just to kind of generalize, if you're doing things in labs like grinding and adjusting and making dust and things that can contaminate the air, contaminate surfaces, and contaminate supplies, you really want this to be in its own designated area. You'll see to the right of the lab space what's called a donning room. Donning refers to the application of PPE, as we talked about just a bit ago. Now we're showing this room as handicap accessible. You see the round circle there, which indicates a 5-foot turning radius. When designing spaces, the handicap accessibility code is a national code and of course a best practice. So we want to make sure that anything that's an employee work area like this can accommodate. So we have that 5-foot turning radius that really dictated the size of this room. But beyond that, a donning space could be as simple as having some locker cubbies for changing if your staff is changing into scrubs on site. If not, if they're putting disposables over their scrubs, just simple wire shelving is a great way to account for the additional PPE in the space. So you can see here with the stars that popped up, anything that's in blue would be treated as a clean space. The air quality would be manipulated such that these rooms have a greater fresh air intake to keep clean stuff clean. Anything in orange would be considered a dirty space. These are areas where we're really at the risk of cross-contamination. The air quality in these spaces, at least what they do on the hospital side and what we can learn from, it's contained as much as possible so it can be treated effectively. It's very hard to treat air, by the way, when you have an open door or an opening. That door makes a huge difference in the effectiveness of whatever method of air quality you're using. But in these spaces, that air is either put through a sophisticated healthcare grade HEPA filtration system before being safely recirculated, or it's exhausted directly out of the building. So let's take a closer look at what some of these new or modified spaces could look like. So again, being more mindful about our clean supplies and thinking about what are we going to do with our increased levels of PPE. Something as simple as designated wire shelving. It doesn't take up a lot of room. It's not terribly expensive, but if it gets your clean supplies out of sterilization or any other areas where they could be contaminated, it's a great move. We're also big fans of tip-out bins because they take up hardly any space. The clear design allows you to see what's there at a glance. It also allows you to visually take inventory of what you're running out of and what needs to be reordered. So going back to, we want to really drive efficiency in our practices to reduce, unnecessary travel, have the supplies you need where you need them. Tip-out bins is a great way to have everyone organized and on the same page when it comes to dealing with the supplies in your office. Now, going back to donning and also PPE storage. So we showed a donning room in the plan example we looked at just a bit ago. The example here is designed more so like what you would see in a hospital space. It's a little bit bigger than what I would say the typical 6 to 8 op practice would need. Although if you're up there in operatories, if you've got ops in the double digits, something of this size could very well be appropriate. But you could see this design has a combination of lockers and wire shelves. So simple things that can make that process a lot easier and a lot smoother. So we also talked about that concept of soiled holding. In a hospital space, they have what are called designated doffing rooms. Doffing is, of course, that removal of your PPE. So the latest CDC and ADA recommendations are having the majority of your PPE actually doffed in the treatment rooms. When it comes to soiled holding as it applies to the dental office, it's just a matter of where do we keep this uptick in contaminated supplies. So a soiled holding room, it could be as simple as a safe storage space, but the ones that are a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more effective, you're going to want to include something like a hand washing sink so that when people go in there and deal with whatever they're taking off or disposing, they can clean their hands safely before they enter back out into the clinical zone of the practice. So in our plan of the future, we are really predicting an uptick of closed operatories. We have noticed in recent years, the open bay or the operatories that don't have 4 walls, right? You share that center island in the middle. Sometimes there's an x-ray arm that passes back and forth or a shared sink. We've noticed these sort of going by the wayside in recent years, even before the pandemic hit. Previously, they were desirable because they made the office feel lighter and brighter and there was a nice casual feel, but there were challenges around acoustics. And now with the COVID-19 pandemic, the more that we can close these spaces, the more effectively we can treat the air quality in that room and contain aerosols. So our best tip for closing operatories in a way that doesn't take up a lot of space is to utilize both a barn door and a pocket door. The dual entry operatories are very popular, so a designated door for doctors and patients, and then a smaller door for the assistant or hygienist to come in and be able to access their place at the patient head without having to interrupt or squeeze their way through. If you use a pocket and a barn door, as you can see, this combination, it's relatively easy to construct and you don't have that invasiveness of a door swing. So you're able to close your operatories without sacrificing space. Now, depending on the kind of procedure that you're doing, or where you're at in terms of your day, or maybe the operatory is open and waiting for the next patient, you can open these doors and it's going to look like they were never there. So you still maintain that nice open feeling of a dual entry operatory, but you now have the option to safely close off that room during procedures. So the other thing that we're showing is a dedicated space for teledentistry. So we know that the recommendations from the CDC are encouraging teledentistry for triage. If you are practicing teledentistry in your office, you can take some cues for what has worked for hospitals. I did hospital design sort of right at the beginning of a lot of the telehealth stuff, and it kind of made people scratch their heads like, I'm a podiatrist, how am I going to do telehealth, right? But now it's so common. And some of the things that we did from a design technique standpoint that were really effective was make this a quiet space so you can have privacy and good acoustics for focus. Have good access to the technology that you need. So I picture in front of these 2 chairs some nice dual monitors with some sleek cable management to keep the room feeling neat and tidy so you can access the technology you need during telehealth discussions. If they're synchronous, meaning you're live with the patient, freedom from clutter is going to be especially important, as well as you've got a backdrop behind you. So think about branding opportunities. Pop-up step and repeat banners or even a nice graphic is a really inexpensive way to enhance that experience and make it feel a lot more professional and a lot more branded. And even for asynchronous teledentistry. So when you're not face-to-face with a patient live, but you're maybe reviewing information in order to triage them, you want this room to be private, you want the acoustics to be right, you want it to be free from distractions so you can easily focus on the tasks. So finally, just returning to our sort of plan of the future, we would absolutely love the opportunity to make your space feel like yours. So I encourage any of you to let us know on the Benco team if you have any questions about your current space, or as you look to renovate or build a new practice. We would love to do a plan just like this, except tailored for you. I also encourage all of you to go on Benco's website and access the Learning Center. You'll see the tab right there up at the top. We're so excited about all of this research that is being spurred from the COVID-19 pandemic. It's kind of a cool silver lining, and we are all about bringing that great information to all of you so we can help drive our industry forward. So please check out the Learning Center. There are some great resources there, as well as a new white paper on infection control. So please check it out. And with that, I thank all of you for hearing some of these new ideas, and I will turn it over to Chuck to answer any questions.
Melissa, thank you very much for being here this evening. I do want to tell you that the Q&A section is open. Got a lot of good compliments there, and one of the best one that came over right from the beginning was one of the attendees thinks that you look and sound like Anne Hathaway. So I thought that was very much a compliment. So it. Congratulations, take a compliment when you get one.
Thank you.
You're like the Anne Hathaway of dental design, and we
Wonderful.
Really appreciate that.
Spoiler alert, I'm about a foot shorter, but I'll take it.
On a webinar, it doesn't matter. All right, so we'll just give one more second for a few, questions. One thought that came in from Linda Anderson, who is a dental consultant who works with Benco, is just to make the point that we will look at existing office plans to make suggestions, right? So no one should feel like they need to purchase a lot of equipment in order to get some ideas about design. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So again, I have this uptick in my empathy level because my husband is a dentist and his practice has been around for 30 years. He's been a part of it for the last 10. But we know very much the reality of sometimes you're limited in your space, your resources, and your time. So we have worked hand in hand with many customers and just given them 5 or 6 things that a contractor can do over a long weekend. Things like adding doors, things like, okay, let's really walk through how you're using your space and talk about how to optimize it. So we know the reality that you can't always wipe the slate clean, and it provides a different and a unique design challenge, and we are here for it. So definitely let us know.
Terrific. All right. So Melissa, thank you very much. As always, a terrific job. This is the second webinar that we've done on office design. Others are only getting around to their first one. We're glad and proud to be leading the thinking on office design in a post-COVID-19 world. And I believe this will be the second probably of a few more to come. Also, I'll put a little plug in. Melissa and I and the design team have been working on a few white papers. So over the next few weeks, you're going to see a few white papers specifically on dental design be posted in our Learning Center. So watch out for those. So if I can ask the closing slides. Thank you very much, Melissa, for being here. Next slide,
Thank
please.
you. Thanks so much.
Okay, so well done. Okay, we do have some upcoming webinars. We have a complimentary webinar every Wednesday. You can hold your phone up to the QR code on your screen and you'll be taken directly to our website. Next slide, please. Upcoming webinars, well, one starts in just a little bit. That's in about half an hour from now. We have a program with Dr. Saul Pressner on biomimetic dentistry, safer and smarter for you and your patients amid COVID-19. It starts at 7 o'clock Eastern time here on the East Coast, just in a few minutes. Dr. Pressner is we used to call a wet finger dentist, but a practicing dentist in New York City, who is a practitioner of biomimetic dentistry. On Wednesday, September 2nd, we have Freedom for PPOs from 1 to 2 with Dr. Gary Light. We have Catherine Eitel Belt, one of our most popular speakers. She's an expert in communication skills. She will be speaking in a workshop called Have Them at Hello, Master and Train Your Team's Unscripted Exceptional Telephone Skills. We all know that in the current environment where patients have a lot of questions, how we answer the phone and communicate with patients can be the difference between making a patient feel comfortable or a patient leaving the practice. Only $49 per person. Friday, September 18th from 12 to 2, that is a workshop. You can purchase your seat at shop.benco.com, item number 5712-874, or you can speak with your friendly Benco rep. Again, thank you very much for being here this evening. Thank you for attending. If there are any questions about the CE credits or anything to follow up, please do email us at practicecoaching@benco.com. Thank you for attending and have a great evening.